Millionaire CEO sees 4 street girls, 9 years old, identical to the ex-wife he expelled 10 years ago. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The sleek black Lincoln Navigator glided to a stop at the red light on 5th Avenue, its tinted windows shielding the man inside from the chaos of Manhattan's streets. Parker Montgomery loosened his Italian silk tie, allowing himself a rare moment of satisfaction. The Chen merger was complete, another billion-dollar deal sealed with his signature, another victory for Montgomery Enterprises. "Mr. Montgomery, shall I take the tunnel back to headquarters?" his driver asked, eyes meeting Parker's in the rearview mirror. "No, James, I need some air. Drop me here, I'll walk the rest of the way." The doorman at the plaza tipped his hat as Parker strode past, his tall frame commanding respect even among Manhattan's elite. At 52, Parker Montgomery's presence had only grown more powerful with age, silver threading elegantly through, his dark hair, stress lines carved around eyes the color of Arctic ice. The November air carried winter's first bite, but Parker barely noticed. His mind raced with projections, acquisitions, the next corporate mountain to conquer. 10 years of relentless work had transformed Montgomery Enterprises from a successful family business into a global empire. 10 years of 16-hour days and sleepless nights. 10 years of emptiness disguised as success. The crosswalk signal changed and Parker moved forward with the crowd, checking his watch. A board meeting in 40 minutes. That's when he saw them. 4 identical little girls huddled together on the street corner, arranging handmade bouquets in plastic buckets. They wore mismatched winter coats, all clearly second-hand, and fingerless gloves that exposed small reddened hands to the cold. A cardboard sign propped against one bucket read, "Flowers for Hope, $5. Parker would have walked past, would have dismissed them as he did all street vendors, but something about them caught his eye. Something in the delicate line of their jaws, the proud tilt of their chins despite their obvious poverty. Then, as if sensing his gaze, one of the girls looked up directly at him. Parker stopped breathing. The world around him, honking taxis, chattering pedestrians, rumbling subway beneath his feet, fell away into silence. Those eyes. Her eyes. Victoria's eyes looking back at him from a face that was 9, maybe 10 years old. Not just one face. 4 identical faces. Quadruplets. The child who'd caught his eye nudged her sister, whispering something. Soon all 4 girls were staring at him with identical expressions of curiosity. Their eyes, his eyes, a piercing blue that had graced Montgomery faces for generations. Parker's phone rang, startling him back to reality. He fumbled for it, dropping his briefcase. "Mr. Montgomery, the board is asking if you'll be delayed." His assistant's voice sounded tinny and distant. I'll call you back," he managed, ending the call without looking away from the girls. One of them, the one who'd first noticed him, stepped forward, a small bouquet extended in her hand. "Would you like to buy some flowers, sir? They're only $5. Her voice shattered something inside Parker, the same musical cadence as Victoria's but higher, childlike, innocent. "Who are you?" he whispered, the question escaping before he could stop it. The girl looked confused, withdrawing the flowers slightly. "I'm Emma. These are my sisters, Lily, Sophie, and Zoe. We're the Flower Girls." She smiled, revealing a missing front tooth. "Everyone calls us that." "Emma," Parker repeated, the name unfamiliar, yet somehow significant. A horn blared nearby, breaking the strange spell. The smallest of the 4 girls, Zoe, he thought, tugged urgently at Emma's sleeve. "We have to go," Emma said. "Ruth will worry." Before Parker could respond, the girls were packing their buckets with practiced efficiency, gathering their unsold bouquets. In less than a minute, they had disappeared into the crowded sidewalk, leaving Parker standing alone, his forgotten briefcase at his feet. 10 years. 10 years since he'd thrown Victoria out. 10 years since she'd tearfully insisted the pregnancy was miraculous but real. 10 years since he'd refused to believe what doctors had told him was impossible. That he, Parker Montgomery, diagnosed as sterile since college, could father a child, let alone 4 identical daughters with Victoria's face and Montgomery eyes. Parker retrieved his briefcase with a trembling hand, his world tilting on its axis. The board meeting, the Chentau merger, the empire he'd built, suddenly none of it mattered. He had to know. He had to find them again. The grandfather clock in Parker's penthouse chimed midnight, its resonance filling the empty space. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows. Manhattan's glittering skyline spread before him, a tumbler of scotch untouched in his hand. His mind kept replaying that moment on the street corner. 4 identical faces, 4 pairs of Montgomery, blue eyes. Impossible, he whispered to his reflection, yet he couldn't shake the resemblance. Parker set down his glass and walked to his home office. From the bottom drawer of his desk, he retrieved a leather-bound box he hadn't opened in years. Inside lay the remnants of his life with Victoria. Photographs, cards, small mementos of their 5-year marriage. Their wedding photo stared up at him. Victoria, radiant in white, her chestnut hair cascading over her shoulders, green eyes sparkling with joy. Beside her, a younger Parker smiled with genuine happiness, something his face had forgotten how to do. He remembered their last night together with painful clarity. Victoria standing in this very room, hands protectively cradling her still flat stomach, tears streaming down her face. "It's a miracle, Parker," she had insisted. "The doctors were wrong. These are our babies." His response had been cold, calculated. "Every specialist confirmed I cannot father children. So whose miracle are you carrying, Victoria?" The hurt in her eyes had been unbearable, but his pride wouldn't let him see reason. The Montgomery name meant everything. Generations of power, prestige, old money. The thought of another man's children bearing that name was unacceptable. His phone had rung during their argument. Eleanor, his sister, calling with urgent business. Parker remembered how Victoria's expression had hardened at the interruption. "Your sister always comes between us," Victoria had said quietly. "She's never wanted this marriage to work." "Don't blame Eleanor for your indiscretion," he'd snapped. The next morning, Victoria was gone, leaving her wedding ring on the bedside table. No note, no explanations, just absence. Parker's fingers traced the gold band, still in the box. He'd convinced himself he was right, that Victoria had betrayed him. Eleanor had reinforced his belief subtly at first, then more explicitly as weeks passed. She was only after the Montgomery fortune, Eleanor had insisted. "I warned you from the beginning." Parker sighed, returning the photos to their box. Had he been manipulated? Had Victoria been telling the truth? Quadruplets did seem statistically improbable as a cover story for infidelity. He reached for his phone, dialing his head of security. "Jenkins, I need you to find someone. 4 young girls, approximately 9 years old. Identical quadruplets." He hesitated. "And locate Victoria Bennett, my ex-wife." After hanging up, Parker stared at the Manhattan skyline, the empire he'd built in Victoria's absence suddenly seeming hollow. Tomorrow he would return to that street corner and wait. He needed answers, even if those answers destroyed everything. He believed about the last decade of his life. Parker arrived at the corner of 5th and 53rd by 7 the next morning, the ghost of yesterday's encounter haunting him. He'd abandoned his usual bespoke suit for jeans, a plain sweater, and a baseball cap, a disguise that felt foreign on his frame. The corner remained empty. No flower buckets, no little girls with haunting blue eyes. He waited 3 hours, ignoring calls from his office. By noon, disappointment had settled into his bones. Perhaps yesterday had been an anomaly. The girls might sell elsewhere or only on weekends. Just as he prepared to leave, a flash of movement caught his eye. Across the street, weaving through the crowd, were 4 small figures in mismatched coats. Relief washed over him, followed immediately by anxiety. The girls set up their makeshift stand with practiced efficiency, arranging modest bouquets of carnations and daisies. Parker watched from behind a newspaper, noting how the one called Emma directed her sisters with gentle authority. A businessman rushed past, accidentally knocking over one of their buckets. Water spilled across the sidewalk, soaking several bouquets. The man didn't stop. Parker's instinct was to intervene, but something held him back. He watched as the smallest girl, Zoe, fought back tears while Sophie wrapped a protective arm around her shoulders. Lily and Emma quickly salvaged what flowers they could. Their resilience was striking. No tantrums, no complaints, just quiet determination as they regrouped. Victoria's determination. When foot traffic slowed around 2 o'clock, the girls packed up their remaining flowers. This was his chance. Parker followed at a distance, staying just close enough to keep their colorful hats in sight. They led him, away from Manhattan's gleaming towers, through neighborhoods growing progressively more modest. In Chelsea, they stopped at a small deli. Through the window, Parker watched Emma carefully counting crumpled bills before purchasing a single sandwich, which they divided into 4 equal parts. The sight twisted something inside him. His daughters, if they were his daughters, sharing one sandwich while he dined at Michelin-starred restaurants. Their journey continued to a rundown area in the Lower East Side, ending at a weathered building with a faded sign, Hope Harbor. Women and Children's Shelter. Parker stood frozen across the street watching the girls disappear inside. The shelter looked clean but desperately underfunded. Peeling paint, cracked windows patched with tape, security bars rusted with age. Victoria in a homeless shelter? The thought was inconceivable. She had come from a respectable family, not wealthy like the Montgomerys, but comfortable. How had she fallen so far? A gray-haired woman appeared in the doorway, greeting the girls with warm hugs. They handed her something. Money from their sales, Parker realized. The woman's face creased with pride before they all disappeared inside. Parker's phone vibrated. Jenkins. Sir, I have preliminary information on Victoria Bennett. Go ahead, Parker said, eyes still fixed on the shelter door. Sir, she's incarcerated. Rikers Island. 6-month sentence for petty theft began serving 4 months ago. The world tilted beneath Parker's feet. Victoria in prison? The Victoria he knew wouldn't steal a paperclip. The children are in temporary custody of a Ruth Abernathy, former social worker. They reside at Hope Harbor Shelter, Parker finished. I know. Decision made, Parker crossed the street with purposeful strides. He had abandoned these children once through ignorance. He wouldn't abandon them again. We always need volunteers, Ms. Abernathy said, eyeing Parker skeptically. In the shelter's cramped office, he felt conspicuously out of place despite his casual clothes. Especially men. Most of our children have never had positive male role models. Parker nodded, maintaining his cover story. I recently sold my tech startup, looking to give back while figuring out my next chapter. Well, Mr. Parker. She paused, at the pseudonym he'd given. Hope Harbor isn't glamorous. We need help with meals, maintenance, tutoring. Still interested? Absolutely. His gaze drifted to a wall of children's artwork. Among them, 4 identical drawings of flower bouquets, each signed with a different name. Emma, Lily, Sophie, Zoe. Ruth followed his gaze. The quadruplets, they're special girls. Her expression softened. Their mother was one of our success stories, until recently. What happened? Parker asked, careful to sound merely curious rather than desperate. Ruth sighed. Victoria worked 3 jobs to keep them afloat. When the pandemic hit, she lost everything. They were evicted. She shook her head. Victoria had trained as a florist before the girls were born. She taught them to arrange bouquets and they started selling on corners. Parker's throat tightened. And now, she's serving time for stealing food from a grocery store. Ruth's voice hardened. Judge made an example of her. 6 months for taking bread and peanut butter. The girls stay here while I petition for temporary guardianship. The casual cruelty of it stunned Parker. Victoria imprisoned for feeding their daughters while he lived in obscene luxury. The girls are remarkable, Ruth continued. They pool their flower money for necessities. Emma handles their finances. She's 9, going on 40. Lily creates the arrangements. Sophie protects them on the streets, and Zoe. Her voice cracked slightly. Zoe keeps their hope alive, reminds them their mother will return. They sell flowers alone? Isn't that dangerous? They have no choice. I can't leave the shelter, and they need the income. Ruth's eyes challenged him. Perhaps you could accompany them sometimes if you're serious about volunteering. Parker nodded, trying to process everything. Does their father help at all? Ruth's expression darkened. Victoria never speaks of him except to say he denied they were his. Some wealthy man who couldn't accept his medical diagnosis was wrong. She studied Parker's face. The girls have his eyes, though. That distinctive blue. Parker felt exposed, transparent. He changed the subject. When can I start? Dinner shift starts in 20 minutes. The girls help serve. Ruth stood. Fair warning, they're suspicious of new adults. They've been disappointed too often. Walking through the shelter's common area, Parker absorbed the reality of where his children had been living. The facility was clean but desperately overcrowded. 30 women and children sharing 4 bathrooms, sleeping in dormitory-style rooms with no privacy. In the kitchen, he froze at the entrance. The quadruplets stood in a line, wearing matching aprons fashioned from adult-sized ones, carefully ladling soup into bowls. Emma noticed him first, his eyes, narrowing suspiciously. Girls, Ruth called. This is Mr. Parker. He's volunteering with us for a while. 4 identical faces studied him with a wariness no child should possess. These weren't carefree children. They were survivors, hardened by necessity. Parker smiled, fighting the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. Hello, he said simply. I'm looking forward to helping out. Do you know anything about flowers? Lily asked unexpectedly. Parker shook his head. Not really, but I'd like to learn. Sophie, the protective one, stepped slightly in front of her. Sisters. Then you can carry the heavy buckets tomorrow. Mr. Parker, you're doing it wrong. Lily sighed, her small hands adjusting the carnation stems he'd arranged in the bucket. They need to breathe. Like this. 3 weeks into his volunteer work, Parker found himself sitting cross-legged on the shelter's floor, surrounded by flowers and 4 increasingly familiar little girls. What had begun as a mission to confirm their identity had evolved into something more complicated. Sorry, he offered, genuinely apologetic. I never realized flowers had rules. Everything has rules, Emma replied matter-of-factly, counting dollar bills from yesterday's sales. You just have to learn them. Parker watched her small fingers sort crumpled ones from 5s with practiced precision. No 9-year-old should be this familiar with financial responsibility. $7 short, she muttered, recounting. We need at least 40 for Mom's commissary account. The casual mention of Victoria's imprisonment still jarred him. He'd learned the girls visited her weekly, Ruth accompanying them on the punishing journey to Rikers Island. Perhaps sales will be better today, he suggested. It's Saturday. Zoe, the quietest of the 4, unexpectedly touched his sleeve. Will you really come with us today? All day? Her tentative hope pierced him. All day, he promised. I'll carry anything you need. Ruth observed their interaction from the doorway, her initial suspicion gradually softening. Girls, finish up. Breakfast in 10 minutes. As they packed away their supplies, Parker approached Ruth. How are they so different from each other? He asked quietly. I thought identical quadruplets would be. More identical? Ruth smiled. Physically, yes, but their personalities were distinct from birth, Victoria says. Her expression grew thoughtful. She named them deliberately, Emma for strength, Sophia for wisdom, Lily for beauty, and Zoe for life. Parker absorbed this. Victoria had given their daughters meaningful names while he remained oblivious to their existence. Victoria worked so hard, Ruth continued. Triple shifts at the hospital as a receptionist, night classes in design, always putting something aside for their education. She shook her head. Until COVID. No job, no apartment, no savings left. And no support, Parker added, self-recrimination bitter in his mouth. Ruth studied him. You seem invested in their story. Children in need concern everyone, he deflected. Later, at their usual corner, Parker stood sentinel while the girls arranged their modest bouquets. Business was steady. Their innocent enthusiasm and identical faces made them impossible to ignore. Parker watched as Emma handled transactions, Sophie scanned for trouble, Lily created arrangements on the spot, and Zoe charmed customers with her shy smile. During a lull, Sophie approached him, suspicious as always. Why do you keep looking at us like that? Parker startled. Like what? Like you're trying to memorize our faces, she said, hands on hips in miniature defiance. Before he could formulate a response, a woman dropped her bouquet, scattering flowers across the sidewalk. Parker knelt to help her, and when he looked up, Sophie was staring at him with sudden intensity. Your eyes, she said slowly. They're the same as ours. Parker froze, heart hammering. Zoe appeared beside her sister. Like those pictures of Mom's husband, she whispered. The ones she keeps, in her special box. Emma overheard, joining them with narrowed eyes. Who are you really, Mr. Parker? The moment he'd both anticipated and dreaded had arrived sooner than expected. 4 pairs of identical blue eyes, his eyes, stared at him, demanding truth. He wasn't prepared to give. I'm just someone who wants to help, he managed, the inadequacy of his response hanging between them. Lily, completing their circle, studied him with artistic perception. You look sad when you think we're not watching. Sometimes, he admitted, when I think about what you've been through. The girls exchanged glances, communicating in that silent language unique to multiples. Mom's sad too, Zoe offered quietly. But she pretends not to be, for us. Parker's chest tightened. She sounds very brave. The bravest, Emma confirmed. Then, unexpectedly, she held out a small daisy. This one's free. For being nice to us. Parker accepted the simple flower, understanding it represented far more than its humble appearance suggested. It was the first, fragile tendril of trust. 6 weeks had transformed Parker Montgomery in ways no board meeting ever could. The man who once judged success by quarterly earnings now measured it by the quadruplets' small smiles. His Italian leather shoes were replaced by practical boots, his schedule dictated not by corporate acquisitions but by flower sales and shelter mealtimes. Mr. Montgomery, the Tokyo investors have called 3 times, his assistant's voice echoed, through his earpiece as he helped the girls load their buckets into Ruth's ancient station wagon. Tell them I'll call tomorrow, Parker replied, wedging the last container into the trunk. Sir, this is the 4th tomorrow this month. The board is concerned about your absence. Parker watched Emma adjust Zoe's scarf with maternal care. Some things are more important, Diane. Handle it. He disconnected before she could respond, turning to find Ruth studying him with her penetrating gaze. Your work must be very understanding, she remarked. Allowing you this much volunteer time, Parker maintained his cover story. The privileges of being your own boss. Ruth nodded, unconvinced. The girls have grown attached to you, especially Zoe. It was true. The smallest quadruplet had begun seeking him out, showing him treasures. From the girls' meager possessions, a blue marble that matched their eyes, a pressed flower from Victoria's last visit, a tattered book of fairy tales with their mother's handwriting inside. They're extraordinary children, Parker said, emotion thickening his voice. Yes, Ruth agreed. Despite everything, Victoria raised them with love and strength. The mention of Victoria sent familiar guilt through him. Through careful questioning, he'd learned more about her downfall. How she'd maintained a modest apartment until the pandemic eliminated her jobs simultaneously. How she'd stretched savings until nothing remained. How she'd finally reached desperate measures when faced with 4 hungry children. Back at his penthouse that evening, Parker reviewed the file his investigator had compiled on Victoria's case. The theft had been minor, food items worth less than $70. Yet the judge had imposed a maximum sentence, citing the need to discourage similar behavior during difficult times. Parker's blood boiled. Victoria Montgomery, now Bennett, sentenced harshly because she dared steal bread, while wealthy Manhattan stockpiled provisions in vacation homes. His phone rang. Eleanor, his sister. Parker, darling, I'm back from Paris, she purred. What's this nonsense Diane tells me about you neglecting meetings? It's not like you. Parker hesitated. He hadn't told Eleanor about the quadruplets. Something held him back. Perhaps the memory of her antipathy toward Victoria, or her satisfaction when the marriage ended. Just needed perspective, he answered carefully. The Chen merger was exhausting. Well, shake it off, Eleanor replied, briskly. The Nakamura Group is ripe for acquisition. I've arranged dinner with their CFO tomorrow. Parker's thoughts flashed to his promise to accompany the girls to a community center art program. I can't tomorrow. Can't? His sister's voice sharpened. Parker, what's going on with you? I'll explain soon, he said, unwilling to elaborate. Good night, Eleanor. After hanging up, Parker turned to his computer, typing a search he'd been avoiding: paternity DNA testing procedures. The results appeared instantly, clinical and straightforward. A simple cheek swab could confirm what his heart already knew, but obtaining samples from the girls would require explanations he wasn't ready to give. Meanwhile, on his dining table lay architectural plans for Hope Harbor's renovation, a charitable foundation project he'd initiated anonymously. Next to them, a folder containing the legal strategy his team was developing to challenge Victoria's sentence. Parker stared at his reflection in the darkened window. The man looking back was unrecognizable from the ruthless CEO of 2 months. His eyes softer, his priorities fundamentally shifted. He picked up the girls' latest creation, a bouquet they'd insisted he take home, now displayed in an elegant vase incongruous with the humble daisies and carnations. Parker touched a delicate petal, marveling at how these 4 small lives had broken through the fortress he'd built around his heart, undoing a decade of practiced indifference. Tomorrow he would miss another meeting. Tomorrow he would keep his promise. The empire could wait. Draw your family, the art instructor said, distributing paper to the community center's weekend class. Parker watched from his corner as the quadruplets exchanged glances before picking up their crayons. While other children drew standard stick figure families with houses and pets, Parker noticed the girls working with unusual concentration. Emma, ever practical, created neat figures with labels. Lily crafted elaborate details on clothing and hair. Sophie's drawing included protective circles around her family members. Zoe added whimsical flowers blooming everywhere. When the instructor asked for volunteers to explain their artwork, Zoe surprisingly raised her hand. This is our family, she said, pointing to 5 female figures. Me, my sisters, and our mom. She's not here right now, but she's still our family. The absence in their family portraits, the deliberate empty space where a father should be, struck Parker physically. He'd never considered how his rejection had shaped their understanding of family. Is Mr. Parker in your drawing? Another child asked innocently. Zoe looked at Parker, then back at her picture. No, but maybe next. Time. That evening, helping Ruth prepare dinner at the shelter, Parker found himself working alongside Emma, whose analytical mind never stopped questioning. Mr. Parker, do you have children? She asked suddenly, methodically stirring the pasta sauce, the question he'd been dreading. No, he answered truthfully yet falsely. I don't. Why not? You're good with kids. Parker considered his response carefully. Sometimes life doesn't work out the way you expect. Emma nodded seriously. Mom says that too. She says sometimes life gives you different gifts than the ones you asked for. Your mother sounds very wise, Parker replied, emotion threatening to choke him. She is, Emma confirmed. She also says we have our father's eyes. Parker nearly dropped the plate he was holding. Does she talk about him often? No, Emma said. It makes her sad, but she keeps his picture in her special box. Later, as the girls prepared for bed, Sophie approached Parker with unusual directness. Why do you look like us? What do you mean? He asked, heart pounding. Your eyes. Your chin. She studied him critically. Lily says your hands look like mine too. Parker glanced down at his long fingers, so similar to the girl's delicate ones. Some people just look alike, Sophie, it happens. She wasn't convinced. Mom's visiting day is tomorrow. Ruth says you can't come because you're not family. Her gaze intensified. But you look like family. The accusation, or perhaps recognition, in her voice left him speechless. After the girls went to bed, Parker retreated to Ruth's office, ostensibly helping with paperwork. In reality, he was gathering courage. Ruth, he began slowly, what if I could help Victoria legally? I have connections. Ruth looked up sharply. What kind of connections would Mr. Parker have? Her emphasis on his pseudonym confirmed her suspicions. Parker took a deep breath. My name isn't just Parker, it's Parker Montgomery. Recognition dawned in her eyes. Montgomery? As in? Victoria's ex-husband, he confirmed. The girl's father. Ruth's expression hardened. The man who threw her out pregnant and destitute, who never answered her letters, her pleas for help. What? Letters? Parker asked, genuinely confused. I never received any communication from Victoria after she left. Ruth's skepticism was palpable. Why should I believe you? Why show up now after 9 years of silence? Parker had no adequate answer, only the truth. I didn't know they existed until I saw them selling flowers. I never knew Victoria was telling the truth about the pregnancy. And now? Now I want to help. I need to help, Parker said, his voice breaking. They're my daughters. Ruth studied him, weighing 9 years of Victoria's struggle against his apparent sincerity. Victoria's hearing for early release was denied yesterday. She finally said, if you truly want to help, start there. But understand this. Those girls have survived without a father for 9 years. Don't destroy what little stability they have unless you plan to stay permanently. Her warning was clear. Actions, not regret, would be his only redemption. Eleanor Montgomery's heels clicked sharply against the marble floor of Parker's penthouse, each step punctuating her growing frustration. 3 canceled dinners, 5 missed board meetings, and dozens of unanswered messages had pushed her patience to its limit. Something was wrong with her brother, and Eleanor was determined to discover what, or who, was responsible. James, she addressed Parker's longtime driver in the lobby. Where has my brother been disappearing to these past weeks? The loyal employee hesitated. I couldn't say, Ms. Montgomery. Mr. Montgomery often dismisses me these days. Eleanor's perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched. Dismisses you? To go where? Lower East Side, usually. I drop him near Hope Harbor. The homeless shelter? Eleanor's voice dripped with distaste. What business could Parker possibly have there? James knew better than to elaborate. Perhaps you should ask him yourself, ma'am. Oh, I intend to, she murmured, already formulating a plan. The next afternoon, Eleanor's black Bentley idled half a block from Hope Harbor. She watched through tinted windows as Parker emerged from the building accompanied by 4 identical little girls and an older woman. Her brother, the man who attended charity galas only for networking opportunities, was carrying plastic buckets filled with flowers, laughing at something one of the children said. Follow them, Eleanor instructed her driver. She observed with growing disbelief as Parker helped the girls set up a makeshift flower stand on a busy corner. The sight was so incongruous with the brother she knew that Eleanor almost questioned her own eyes. Then one of the girls turned and Eleanor's blood froze. Those eyes. The distinctive Montgomery blue. The same shade that had graced the family portraits for generations. Worse, the child's profile, all their profiles, bore the unmistakable resemblance to Victoria, the woman Eleanor had worked so diligently to remove from their lives a decade ago. "No," she whispered. "Impossible." Eleanor's mind raced through calculations. The girls appeared to be around 9 years old. Victoria had claimed pregnancy just before Parker banished her. The timing aligned perfectly. Parker had always accepted the medical diagnosis of sterility without question. Eleanor had made certain of that, going so far as to befriend his doctor's assistant to ensure the reports remained definitive. It had been essential to her plan. Victoria's unexpected pregnancy announcement had provided the perfect opportunity to sever the marriage Eleanor had opposed from the start. Victoria Bennett, formerly Montgomery, had been a threat. Too perceptive, too stubborn, too quick to challenge Eleanor's influence over her brother and the family fortune. Eleanor had recognized the danger immediately and acted accordingly, feeding Parker's doubts, encouraging his suspicions. Now, watching her brother tenderly adjust a little girl's coat collar, Eleanor felt her carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. When Parker returned to his penthouse that evening, Eleanor was waiting, a glass of Bordeaux in hand, and fury carefully concealed behind a practiced smile. "Ellie," Parker started, clearly surprised. "How did you get in?" "I still have a key, darling. Family privilege." She sipped her wine. "Though I'm beginning to wonder if you've forgotten the meaning of family." Parker's posture stiffened. "What are you talking about? Don't insult my intelligence." Eleanor set down her glass. "I saw you today with those children. Victoria's children." Her eyes narrowed. "Children who look remarkably like you." The color drained from Parker's face. "You followed me?" "Someone needed to discover what's been consuming your attention while our company flounders." Eleanor stepped closer. "Are they why you've been neglecting everything you've built? Some misguided paternal awakening?" "They're my daughters, Ellie." Parker's voice was quiet but firm. "Quadruplets. Victoria was telling the truth." "And you believe that?" Eleanor scoffed. "After all this time, you're falling for her manipulation again?" "I've seen them, spoken with them." Parker's eyes hardened. "They have my eyes, my expressions. Even if I hadn't known Victoria's character, the resemblance is undeniable." Eleanor struggled to maintain composure. "Even if these girls are somehow yours, which I still doubt, why involve yourself now? Victoria made her choice when she left." "When I forced her out," Parker corrected. "Pregnant and alone, based on medical information that was clearly wrong. And now I discover she's in prison for stealing food to feed our children." "Prison?" This was news to Eleanor, though she quickly masked her surprise. "How convenient." The perfect sympathy play. Parker's expression darkened. "Victoria's suffering isn't a play, Eleanor. She's serving 6 months for a petty theft while our daughters live in a shelter. And naturally you're rushing to the rescue," Eleanor said, unable to keep the disdain from her voice. "Have you considered the scandal? How this will affect Montgomery Enterprises? Your credibility?" "I don't care about any of that right now." The statement horrified Eleanor more than anything else he'd said. Parker Montgomery, indifferent to the family empire. Unthinkable. "You need time to think clearly," she said, modulating her tone. "These emotional discoveries have clouded your judgment. Step back. Let me handle this situation." "Handle it?" Parker's voice turned dangerous. "What exactly does that mean, Ellie?" "Protection, brother dear. For you, for the Montgomery name." She reached for her purse. "These situations can be resolved discreetly. Financial arrangements made." "There will be no arrangements," Parker said firmly. "These are my children. Not a problem to be solved." Eleanor studied her brother, recognizing the resolve in his expression. This would require more subtle tactics. "I see you've made up your mind," she conceded falsely. "Just promise me you'll proceed carefully. Verify paternity officially before making any permanent decisions." Parker nodded, seemingly relieved by her apparent acceptance. "I plan to, and I'm working to secure Victoria's early release. Of course, Eleanor murmured, already calculating her next move. Family first, after all. After a perfunctory farewell, Eleanor departed, immediately calling her most discreet private investigator from the elevator. I need everything on Victoria Bennett, she instructed. Focus on prison communications, financial situations, anything suggesting intent to exploit a wealthy ex-husband, and expedite it. We have very little time. Eleanor Montgomery had eliminated Victoria once before. She would do so again more permanently this time, regardless of what or who stood in her way. The polished offices of Hemsworth and Associates occupied the 47th floor of a sleek Manhattan high-rise, a world away from Hope Harbor's peeling paint and donated furniture. Parker sat across from Alexandra Hemsworth, one of New York's most formidable attorneys, watching as she reviewed Victoria's case file. Frankly, Mr. Montgomery, this sentencing is unusually harsh for a first-time offender, Alexandra said, removing her reading glasses. 6 months for shoplifting basic necessities. Most similar cases receive community service. Can you get her released early? Parker asked, leaning forward. Alexandra tapped her pen thoughtfully. The judge who handled her case, Philip Crawford, has a reputation for being particularly severe with what he calls pandemic opportunists. But even by his standards, this is excessive. What aren't you saying? Parker pressed. Something feels not targeted. She flipped through the documents again. Did your ex-wife have prior history with Judge Crawford? Parker shook his head. Not that I'm aware of. And the denial of her recent, early release hearing was equally irregular. She has perfect behavior, no priors, dependent children. Alexandra's eyes narrowed. Someone wanted her to serve every day of the sentence. The implication hung in the air. Parker's mind immediately went to Eleanor, but he pushed the thought away. His sister could be manipulative, but interfering with the justice system seemed extreme even for her. I need you to explore every avenue, Parker said firmly. Money is no object. Alexandra nodded. I'll have my team work around the clock. Meanwhile, I suggest you formalize your relationship with the children. If we secure Victoria's release, custody questions will inevitably arise. Parker had been avoiding this next step, knowing it would irrevocably change everything. I'll need paternity testing. I can arrange discrete testing through a private lab, Alexandra offered, but you'll need consent either from Victoria or their current guardian. Parker thought of Ruth, her protective stance toward the girls. I'll handle that part myself. Later that afternoon, Parker found himself in Dr. Lawrence Whitman's office, the fertility specialist who had diagnosed him as sterile over a decade ago. Mr. Montgomery, Dr. Whitman greeted him nervously. This is unexpected. My receptionist said it was urgent. I need to understand something, doctor. Parker remained standing, using his height to full advantage. 10 years ago, you told me I could never father children. You were quite definitive. Whitman shifted uncomfortably. Medicine isn't always exact. 4 children, doctor. Parker interrupted. Identical quadruplets. Explain how your inexact medicine failed to account for that possibility. The doctor's face paled. Quadruplets? That's statistically improbable with your condition. Not improbable. You said impossible. Parker leaned closer. I need to see my complete medical records, every test, every result. I'd have to check our archives. Whitman hedged. Now, doctor, or my next visit will be with my attorneys. 20 minutes later, Parker stared at the original laboratory reports, comparing them with the summary he'd been provided years ago. The discrepancy was subtle but undeniable. His condition had indicated severely reduced fertility, not the absolute sterility Whitman had pronounced. Why the misrepresentation? Parker demanded. Whitman wiped perspiration from his forehead. Your sister, Ms. Eleanor Montgomery, she requested a consultation about your results, suggested that a more definitive diagnosis would be kinder, less ambiguous. Cold realization washed over Parker. My sister asked you to change my diagnosis? Not explicitly, Whitman backpedaled. She merely expressed concern about giving you False hope. Said you and your wife were having difficulties, that uncertainty would be cruel. Parker controlled his rising anger. And you altered your medical opinion based on my sister's concern? I merely emphasized the most likely outcome, Whitman insisted weakly. The probability of conception was indeed extremely low. Low enough that when my wife became pregnant with quadruplets, I accused her of infidelity and threw her out. Parker's voice was dangerously quiet. Low enough that 4 children have grown up in poverty while I lived in ignorance. The doctor had no response. As Parker left the medical building, his phone rang. Jenkins, his head of security. Sir, we've completed the background check on Ruth Abernathy. She's legitimate. 30 years as a social worker before retirement. Clean record, well respected. And the shelter's financial situation? Critical, Jenkins replied. They've been operating on donations, but property taxes are significantly overdue. Eviction proceedings have begun. Parker made an immediate decision. Purchase the building through a shell corporation. Clear the tax debt, but maintain confidentiality. I don't want my name attached yet. Understood, sir. There's something else. Jenkins hesitated. Ms. Eleanor's private investigator has been making inquiries about Victoria Bennett and the children, attempting to access sealed juvenile records, prison communications, bank statements. Parker's grip tightened on his phone. His sister was moving faster than anticipated. Stay on it. I want to know everything she discovers. And Jenkins, prioritize monitoring communications between Victoria and anyone outside the prison if Eleanor is interfering there. Already on it, sir. We've identified unusual patterns in Ms. Bennett's mail delivery. Several letters to the children were significantly delayed or apparently lost. The pieces were falling into place with disturbing clarity. Parker ended the call and dialed Ruth's number. We need to talk, he said when she answered. About DNA testing and Victoria's correspondence with the girls. Ruth agreed to meet him at a quiet cafe near the shelter. When he arrived, she was already waiting, a thick envelope on the table. Before we discuss anything else, she said without preamble, you should see these. Inside were dozens of envelopes addressed to Parker Montgomery at various Montgomery Enterprises locations, all marked Return to Sender, Recipient Unknown or Refused. The postmarks spanned nearly a decade, beginning shortly after Victoria's departure. She kept copies, Ruth explained. Victoria documented everything, letters, medical records, birth certificates. She tried to reach you for years. Parker examined a faded photograph showing a much younger Victoria in a hospital bed, 4 tiny infants in her arms. On the back, in Victoria's handwriting, the Montgomery quadruplets, Emma, Lily, Sophie, and Zoe. 7 pounds combined. Please tell their father they're waiting to meet him. I never received any of these, Parker said, his voice hollow. Not one. Ruth studied him carefully. Your sister's work, perhaps? Victoria mentioned she controlled much of your communication. Parker nodded, pieces connecting. Eleanor has been protective, especially after our parents died. Protective or controlling? Ruth asked pointedly. Victoria believed she deliberately sabotaged your marriage. The question hit uncomfortably close to Parker's emerging suspicions. I need to establish paternity officially, he said, redirecting the conversation. Not because I doubt it, but because I'll need legal standing to help the girls and Victoria. Ruth's expression softened slightly. I suspected this conversation was coming. The girls have been asking questions since they noticed your resemblance. Will you consent to the testing, as their temporary guardian? Ruth considered him carefully. On one condition, you tell them the truth yourself regardless of what you plan to do afterward. These children have had enough dishonesty in their lives. Parker agreed, though the prospect terrified him. There's something else. The shelter's financial troubles have mysteriously disappeared, Ruth finished. The building's new owner has cleared all debts and frozen the eviction. An anonymous foundation. Parker didn't confirm or deny his involvement. About Victoria's letters to the girls, have they been arriving regularly? Now that you mention it, no. Ruth frowned. The Prison allows weekly correspondence, but it's spotty at best. The girls received nothing for nearly a month, then 3 letters at once. Someone may be intercepting her mail, Parker said carefully. Someone who doesn't want the connection between us to be reestablished. Understanding dawned in Ruth's eyes. Your sister again? I can't prove it yet, Parker admitted, but I'm getting closer. As they parted ways, Parker felt the weight of responsibility settling more firmly on his shoulders. The investigation was expanding beyond simple questions of paternity into something darker, a deliberate conspiracy that had separated him from his family for nearly a decade. Eleanor had always claimed to protect the Montgomery legacy, but as Parker pieced together her methodical destruction of his marriage and continued interference, he was beginning to understand just how far his sister would go to maintain her control, and what he would have to do to stop her. Rikers Island loomed, gray and imposing against the morning sky, a concrete monument to human failure and suffering. Parker sat in his car outside the visitor entrance, fingers drumming nervously on the steering wheel. After weeks of legal maneuvering, Alexandra Hemsworth had finally secured him visiting privileges with Victoria. The DNA test results lay in an envelope on the passenger seat. Results he already knew in his heart, but now had scientific confirmation of 99.99999% probability of paternity for all 4 girls. He'd asked Ruth to keep this information from the children until after he spoke with Victoria. Some conversations needed to happen in the proper order. Parker checked, his reflection in the rearview mirror, barely recognizing himself. The past 2 months had transformed him physically as well as emotionally. Stress and revelation etched new lines around his eyes, and the perfectly maintained corporate appearance had given way to something more authentic, less controlled. You can do this, he told his reflection, though the tremor in his voice betrayed his uncertainty. The prison's processing was dehumanizing by design, surrendering personal items, passing through metal detectors, submitting to searches, all under the watchful eyes of guards whose expressions conveyed bored contempt. Parker endured it mechanically, his mind fixed on the imminent confrontation. The visiting room was divided by a thick plexiglass barrier, communication conducted through telephones mounted on each side. Other visitors huddled in similar cubicles, mothers with young children, elderly parents, weary spouses, all maintaining connections through institutional barriers. Parker took his assigned seat, heart pounding so loudly he was certain the guard could hear it. 5 minutes passed before a door opened on the opposite side. Victoria entered, and Parker's breath caught in his throat. 10 years had changed her, yet somehow not diminished her. Thinner, yes. Prison food and stress had hollowed her cheeks. Her once lustrous chestnut hair was pulled back severely, showing early threads of silver at the temples. The standard-issue uniform hung on her small frame, making her appear more vulnerable than he remembered. But her eyes, those remarkable green eyes that had once looked at him with such love, remained the same, though now they widened with shock as she recognized him. Victoria froze, clearly unprepared for this particular visitor. For a moment, Parker thought she might turn and leave. Instead, with visible effort, she composed herself and approached the partition. They stared at each other through the barrier, neither reaching for the telephone. A decade of silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken accusations and explanations. Finally, Victoria picked up her receiver. Parker mirrored the action. 10 years, she said simply, her voice huskier than he remembered. What could possibly bring the great Parker Montgomery to Rikers Island after all this time? The bitterness in her tone was justified, yet carefully controlled. I saw them, he replied, the words inadequate for the magnitude of his discovery. The girls, selling flowers on Fifth Avenue. Victoria's composure wavered slightly. And now you believe they're yours? How convenient for your conscience. I never received your letters, Victoria. Parker leaned forward. Any of them, not the ones from the hospital, not the ones with their photographs. Nothing. Skepticism flashed across her face. I sent dozens over years, all returned or ignored. Eleanor, Parker said, the single name and explanation that seemed to resonate with Victoria. I suspected as much, she admitted. Your sister made her feelings about me quite clear. I have the DNA results, Parker continued, lifting the envelope. Slightly. Though I didn't need them to see the truth, they have my eyes, my expressions. Your stubbornness, Victoria added with the ghost of a smile, quickly suppressed. Why are you here, Parker? What do you want? The question was reasonable. What did he want? Forgiveness seemed too much to ask, understanding too little. To help, he said finally. To make amends, if possible. Victoria studied him through the plexiglass, years of hardship having taught her to be wary of sudden generosity. My attorney is working to secure your early release, Parker continued when she remained silent. The sentencing was excessive. We believe there may have been interference. By Eleanor again? Victoria's laugh held no humor. I wondered why the judge was so determined to make an example of me. First-time offender, 4 dependents, stealing food rather than luxury items. She leaned closer to the glass. Did you know I was offered a deal? Plead guilty, serve 30 days. Then suddenly, the offer vanished, and I was facing the maximum. Parker's suspicions solidified into certainty. Eleanor has always been protective of the Montgomery name. Protective? Victoria's eyes flashed. Is that what you call destroying lives? Separating children from their father? Ensuring they grew up in poverty while you accumulated even more wealth? Her anger, contained for so long, finally surfaced. Parker accepted it without defense. You're right, he acknowledged. I failed all of you. I believed what I wanted to believe because it was easier than questioning Eleanor or the doctors. I never looked for you, never verified anything. Victoria's hands tightened around the telephone. Do you have any idea what these years have been like? Working 3 jobs while heavily pregnant? Giving birth alone? Raising 4 children without support? Watching them go without things other children take for granted? Each question struck Parker like a physical blow. No, he admitted. I can't imagine. We were managing, Victoria continued, her voice cracking slightly. Not thriving, but surviving. Then COVID hit, and everything collapsed. No jobs, no safety. Net, the savings I'd scraped together evaporated in months. Parker thought of his own pandemic experience. Inconvenienced but fundamentally unaffected, his wealth insulating him from the economic devastation others experienced. Ruth told me some of it, he said quietly. The girls have been remarkable through all this. At the mention of her daughters, Victoria's expression softened. They're the best of me. I've tried to give them stability, values, love. Even when everything else was uncertain. They speak of you constantly, Parker told her. Your strength, your sacrifice, they're selling flowers to contribute to your commissary account. Victoria closed her eyes briefly, composing herself. Have you told them who you are? Not yet. Ruth thought you should know first, decide how to proceed. Victoria nodded slightly, acknowledging the courtesy. And how do you propose we proceed, Parker? You can't simply appear in their lives and disappear again when your guilt is assuaged. The challenge was fair. Parker leaned closer to the glass. I want to be their father, Victoria. Not from a distance, not through financial support alone. I want to know them, help raise them, be present for all the moments I've already missed. Victoria studied him, searching for signs of insincerity. And if I refuse? If I decide your sudden paternal interest comes too late? The question terrified him, but Parker answered honestly. Then I would respect your decision, continue providing financial support anonymously, and hope someday you might reconsider. His answer seemed to surprise her. The Parker she had known would have leveraged his wealth and influence to get what he wanted, regardless of others' wishes. You've changed, she observed. They changed me, Parker replied simply. Seeing them, getting to know them, even without them knowing who I am, has transformed everything. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, considering. Eleanor won't accept this easily, she finally said. She spent a decade ensuring I remained invisible. I'm dealing with Eleanor, Parker assured her, though the confrontation still loomed ahead. The girls have questions about their father, Victoria admitted. Questions I've answered as honestly as possible without creating false hope. What have you told them? That you didn't believe they were yours. That you were successful but distant. That they have your eyes. Her gaze met his directly. I never vilified you, Parker. Their image of their father isn't one of abandonment, but of absence. There's a difference. The distinction mattered. It left room for redemption, for relationship. Thank you for that, Parker said, emotion thickening his voice. They deserve better than both of us gave them. The guard announced 5 minutes remaining. Victoria straightened, decision apparently made. If you're sincere about being in their lives permanently, not just salving your conscience, then yes, you can tell them. But Parker, her voice hardened, if you hurt them, if you make promises you don't keep, there will be no third chance. Understood? Parker nodded, relief and terror mingling equally. Understood. And Victoria, I'm getting you out of here. Soon. As they prepared to end the visit, Victoria added one final thought. Be careful with Eleanor. She's had 10 years to entrench her position. She won't relinquish control easily. The warning echoed Parker's own concerns. As he walked from the prison, his resolve crystallized. Eleanor's manipulation had cost him a decade with his daughters, Victoria's freedom, and nearly destroyed 4 innocent lives. It was time to confront the true architect of his family's destruction. Everything you requested, sir. Jenkins placed the folder on Parker's desk with unusual solemnity. For 3 days, his security team had conducted a thorough investigation into Eleanor's activities, gaining access to emails, phone records, and financial transactions dating back a decade. The evidence was damning beyond Parker's worst suspicions. His sister had intercepted every letter Victoria sent, establishing mail redirects at multiple Montgomery properties. She'd pressured Dr. Whitman to misrepresent Parker's fertility results through subtle threats to his practice. Most disturbing were recent communications with Judge Crawford, substantial donations to his re-election campaign followed by personal concerns about Victoria's case. But the final discovery left Parker physically ill. Eleanor was actively fabricating evidence suggesting Victoria had planned to publicly claim paternity and demand Montgomery money upon release, a scheme designed to extend her prison sentence. Sir, Jenkins hesitated. There's more. She's arranged a meeting tomorrow with social services, suggesting the quadruplets would benefit from structured care rather than shelter living. Parker stared at the document in stunned silence. Eleanor wasn't just protecting the past, she was actively working to ensure Victoria's daughters remained separated from both parents. The time for delicate handling was over. His sister had declared war on his family, and Parker Montgomery was finally ready to fight back. Eleanor sipped champagne in Parker's penthouse, admiring Manhattan's skyline. The Nakamura deal is nearly finalized. Your absence was inconvenient, but I managed beautifully. Parker observed his sister, elegant, poised, utterly remorseless. The woman who'd orchestrated his family's destruction stood discussing business as if nothing else mattered. 10 years, Parker said quietly. 10 years you've been lying to me. Eleanor's smile faltered slightly. What are you talking about? Parker placed the evidence folder on the coffee table. Victoria's intercepted letters, my falsified medical records, your communications with Judge Crawford. Eleanor's composure cracked momentarily before her features hardened. Everything I did was to protect you, to protect our family name. By separating me from my children, by imprisoning their mother. Those girls were never supposed to exist. Eleanor snapped, mask finally slipping. Victoria trapped you with that pregnancy. She was beneath you, threatening everything our parents built. They're my daughters, Eleanor, my blood. The Montgomery legacy is more important than sentimentality, she countered coldly. I've dedicated my life to preserving what you seem eager to dilute. Parker saw his sister clearly for the first time. Not protective, but possessive. Not loyal, but manipulative. I've already removed you as signatory from all Montgomery accounts. Parker said calmly. Your access to company, resources ends today. Eleanor paled. You can't do that. I'm a Montgomery. So are Emma, Lily, Sophie, and Zoe, Parker replied. Family isn't just about legacy, Eleanor. It's about love. Something you've never understood. His sister's face contorted with fury. You'll regret choosing them over me. No, Parker said with absolute certainty. This is the first choice in 10 years I won't regret. The Montgomery name carries significant weight, Mr. Montgomery, but what you're asking requires extraordinary measures. Alexandra Hemsworth's corner office overlooked Central Park, its opulence, a stark contrast to Victoria's prison cell. Getting the judge to reconsider a sentence already in progress. I understand the challenge, Parker replied, sliding the folder of Eleanor's communications across the polished desk. But this evidence suggests judicial misconduct influenced by my sister's interference. Alexandra's expression changed as she reviewed the documents. This is substantial. Judge Crawford appears to have a clear conflict of interest. She looked up. We can file an emergency motion today. Parker nodded, relieved. And the guardianship papers? Ready for your signature, Alexandra confirmed, though temporary custody will remain with Ruth until Victoria's release. Back at Hope Harbor that evening, Parker gathered the quadruplets in Ruth's office, his heart hammering. How do you tell 4 9-year-olds you're the father who's been absent their entire lives? Girls, he began carefully. I haven't been completely honest about who I am. 4 identical pairs of blue eyes, his eyes, regarded him with varying expressions. Emma's suspicion, Sophie's protectiveness, Lily's curiosity, Zoe's hope. My full name is Parker Montgomery. He swallowed hard. I'm your father. Silence fell, broken finally by Sophie's accusatory tone. You're the one who didn't believe we were yours. Yes, Parker admitted. I made a terrible mistake. Mom said, You have buildings with your name on them, Lily offered. Really tall ones. She told us we have your eyes, Zoe added quietly. Emma, analytical as always, asked the crucial question. Why come find us now? Parker met their gaze directly. Because seeing you was like finding a piece of myself I never knew was missing, and I'd like a chance to be your father if you'll let me. Victoria Bennett stood outside the prison gates, blinking in the bright spring sunshine. After 5 months of confinement, freedom felt surreal, overwhelming. Alexandra Hemsworth stood beside her explaining the legal miracle that had secured her early release, but Victoria barely heard the words. Her focus remained on the 4 small figures rushing toward her. Mom! The quadruplets reached her simultaneously, creating a tangle of arms and tearful embraces. Victoria knelt, gathering all 4 daughters close, inhaling their familiar scent, reassuring herself they were real. My beautiful girls, she whispered, cupping their faces. I've missed you so much. Only when she stood did Victoria notice Parker hanging back, uncertainty written across his features. Their eyes met over the children's heads, a decade of pain, misunderstanding, and new beginnings condensed into a single look. We have a surprise, Emma announced, breaking the tension. We don't have to go back to Hope Harbor. Dad got us an apartment. The word dad, spoken so naturally by her daughter, struck Victoria deeply. In just 3 weeks, Parker had earned a place in their lives. Later, as the girls explored their new temporary home, modest by Montgomery standards but luxurious after shelter living, Parker approached Victoria cautiously. I wanted you to have independence, he explained. The deed is in your name. Victoria studied the man before her, humbled by circumstances, transformed by fatherhood, yet unmistakably still Parker. This isn't forgiveness, she said quietly. That will take time. I know, he nodded, but it's a beginning. From the next room came the sound of children's laughter, their children, bridging the chasm between past and future. 1 year later, Central Park bloomed with spring flowers. As the Montgomery quadruplets celebrated their 10th birthday, a modest gathering occupied the picnic area near the carousel. Ruth from Hope Harbor, several shelter families, the girls' new classmates, and teachers from their private school. Victoria arranged cupcakes on a checkered tablecloth, her floral design business finally thriving thanks to Park Avenue clients who valued her artistic touch. Nearby, Parker supervised the hanging of handmade decorations, looking more relaxed in jeans and a casual shirt than he ever had in bespoke suits. "They look happy," Victoria observed as their daughters led a game of tag. Identical blue dresses and matching smiles creating a kaleidoscope effect as they moved. "They are happy," Parker replied. "We all are, aren't we?" The year had transformed them. After Eleanor's conviction for fraud and interference with judicial proceedings, Parker had restructured Montgomery Enterprises to prioritize family-centered philanthropy. The Hope Harbor Foundation now supported transitional housing for single parents across New York. Victoria and Parker's relationship had evolved into something neither expected, not the rekindling of romance, but a deeper partnership built on shared purpose and mutual respect. They coordinated schedules, attended school events together, and gradually constructed a new definition of family. "Time for cake," Ruth called, summoning the quadruplets. As the girls gathered around 4 identical cakes, each reflecting their unique personalities despite their matching faces, Parker reached for Victoria's hand. "Thank you," he said simply, "for giving me a second chance to be their father." Victoria squeezed his fingers gently. "And thank you for showing them that people can change, mistakes can be mended, and family is worth fighting for." Together they watched as their daughters blew out their candles, releasing wishes into the spring air. Wishes that, unlike a decade ago, now had every chance of coming true.